Chapter 52. Transfer. It was a good thing it was Easter break. Harry didn't think he could have managed to go back into a regular school schedule the day after Azkaban fell. Not just because he needed time to process, but because he didn't want to see the hateful gazes of students that had family members who'd been in the prison when it collapsed. Remus had taken on the brunt of explaining what had happened, while Dumbledore and Dawlish had been unconscious. Harry just interjected a few things he forgot. And the defense professor deliberately skipped over anything about the game system. The way he told it, it wasn't clear why the Lick had seen a kindred spirit in the boy who lived, though the implication was that it was all about his fame. Dawlish didn't seem to totally buy it, but was worried enough about how close they'd come to a centuries-old doc, wizards stealing nuclear bombs to lead a cult to space that he didn't press too hard. Harry'd given a more thorough accounting to Dumbledore once Dawlish transferred to the Aura boat to direct rescue efforts. He had the chat log to cover everything in extensive detail, after all. Taking it all in, the old man made them promise they wouldn't remove anything from the guild vault until he had a chance to accompany them, and then dropped them at the shore while he went to explain the situation to the ministry. It was always going to get out what had happened. The ministry leaked to the press worse than any government on the planet. Only the members of the Department of Mysteries managed to keep secrets, and if they didn't need to take a magical oath that literally left them unable to speak about their work, they'd have probably gabbed too. With the need to call in and organize dozens of bureaucrats and auras on a Sunday evening to help look for prisoners that might have survived, it was only a question of whether the news would make the Daily Prophet on Monday or wait until Tuesday. Before he got back to Hogwarts, Harry had remembered to hurriedly message everyone to get back into a party led by Lee, so they'd all get the quest XP. They got 2,500 XP for it, which was pretty decent for all that it was only a fraction of the other awards he'd gotten that day. Both Hermione and Ron got bumped to level 4, Ginny finally hit level 2, but the twins and Lee didn't seem to quite hit 6, though they were presumably close. Level up, Charmer, level up, Charmer. Ron wasted no time in trying, once Harry informed him that they'd leveled. They'd all met up in the room of requirement as soon as Harry and Remus returned to the castle. The two had needed to grab food in Hogsmeade on the way back in, since they'd missed the evening meal in the dining hall. Only the first one seemed to do anything, Harry told his best friend. Sweet. That must mean I'm at 20 like Lee. Ron gave a grin that was significantly more infectious, as he was clearly benefiting from whatever perk came with maximum charisma. Hermione couldn't keep her eyes off of him despite herself, especially when he then said, "Level up, bodybuilder," and once again grew obviously more muscular in moments, straining against his robes. "You're going to have to get clothes from Charlie at this rate," George observed. "Guess we're going home for the halls after all," Fred nodded. "Everyone probably should," Sirius figured. "Don't want anyone having to answer questions for a couple weeks once people find out about the prison." He still had a silly grin on his face that the hated building had been destroyed. "Level up, Stoic. Level up, Stoic." Hermione pulled her eyes off Ron to try her own level up. "Same as Ron, only the first one took," Harry informed her. "That's what I expected, but I didn't want to risk not hitting 20, she nodded. "I'll move on to perception, I suppose. Level up, lookout." "If you're going perception, I guess I'll focus on finesse," Harry shrugged. He probably ought to do something about his 3 lowest abilities, but it was way more interesting to chase capstone perks. Level up, operator. Level up, operator. That put him at 17, so only one more upgrade from maxing it out. He still wasn't sure what exactly finesse would get him, but Hermione speculated that it would at the very least make it easier for him to perform precise wand movements. It would likely also aid in things like drawing and lockpicking, which he had the general skills for. "You said I also got a level," Remus checked. When Harry nodded, he asked, "I don't suppose there's anything in there that's werewolf-specific." Harry checked, scrolling through looking for anything that he was locked out of because he didn't meet the prerequisite of being a werewolf. Eventually, he answered, "There are a couple to make you a more dangerous werewolf. Increases your magic resistance and damage when in wolf form. The greyback special, I'm sure," the defense professor frowned. "Not exactly what I'm looking for. I'll gamble on being stronger-willed, giving me more of a chance of controlling the beast, I suppose. Level up, Stoic." Level up, stoic. He flashed twice after mimicking Hermione, clearly having had 14 willpower or lower beforehand. Level up, charmer. Level up, charmer. Ginny quietly whispered, Harry barely noticing her flares of level selection at the back of the group. But she was hoping he'd notice a lot more about her, going forward. So what do you get as loot? Ron asked, now that all level-ups were accounted for. Just some spanners and some metals, Harry admitted, having checked the items he'd shoved into his personal inventory. I guess he was mostly carrying stuff he could use to work on his machines. But the spanner says it's enchanted to be better at making clockwork, and I do technically know how to repair that. He thought about it for a second and equipped the oversized magical wrench, admitting, I don't think this is going to really help me fix somebody's watch, though. I wonder what's in the guild vault, Hermione said, having heard about it from Harry. Go carefully, Remus cautioned. He wasn't going to outright say to follow Dumbledore's order about not opening it without him, but there could be many cursed objects inside. Open Children of the Ark Guild Vault, Harry checked. Must be in Guild Hall or Bank to access Guild Vault. Ha! I have to be in the Guild Hall or a bank. I guess it's kind of the same as my personal vault, Harry recounted the prompt. We should probably check to see if the Marauders have a vault, or if we have to build a room for it at the house. Make the room of requirement a bank, Fred suggested. Brilliant, George followed up. It was rare that he and his brother didn't have the same bright idea at the same time, but he was excited by it nonetheless. Yeah, okay, looks like we can try that, Harry agreed, drilling down on the room of requirement menu until he found an option. Everyone out and back in. When they re-entered the room after resetting it, it was doing a pretty good approximation of Gringotts, sans Goblin Tellers. I wonder if we could store stuff here ourselves, Ron asked. Hermione figured it might be the most secure place in the universe, since it only even exists when someone asks for a bank. Or it could be easily available to anyone else that requested a room that might include your stuff, the same way you can get all the items in the room of hidden things. She shrugged. Worth testing, at least. Open Children of the Ark Guild Vault, Harry tried again, after walking over to one of the room's spaces set up like a teller's desk, and this time it opened. Whoa, that's a lot of stuff, he explained, not really having had a chance to do more than glance at it when they were fleeing the tower. Though it looks like some of it has icons on it, that means it's damaged. It probably was a room on the premises then, Hermione reasoned. You should move it all somewhere else before it gets crushed further or gets water damage. And the order you move it might be important, Remus added. If the images you're seeing are serving as a catalogue of physical items that are currently crushed under the stones of the tower, removing some may allow the room to collapse more fully. As Harry blanched, he shrugged and said, no pressure. Sirius also realized, I don't know if you should pull it all out in here either, in case some of it is cursed. This school has enough issues with cursed items. Open Marauders Guild Vault, Harry checked. Another pane opened that was similar, but noted that it was the other guild. Oh, neat. We already have one. And it already has some stuff in it. Looks like there's some money, jewels, and a few magic-looking items. Ha! Sirius realized. I knew there had to be a family vault in the house somewhere. My parents would never admit it, and certainly wouldn't have told me where it was. But now that we know for sure, we can hunt for where it's hidden, and you can just pull stuff in and out of it. He grinned at the idea of having pulled one over on his dead family. Also, it should be safe to move cursed items in there. Merlin knows we've kept more than a few over the centuries. Okay, Harry nodded at the approval. Okay, he said again, psyching himself up. Have to do this fast. He moved the two panes side by side as close as possible and scrolled down to the books. The skill books were the thing he was most interested in retaining, so he'd try to move them first. And go. Between his maxed-out agility and newly high finesse, Harry's arms were a fast but precise blur as he used both hands to grab icons from one guild vault and drag them onto the other. To everyone else in the room, it was like he was conducting a symphony, with flickers of objects appearing and disappearing in an eye blink. As they technically materialized in the room in the fraction of a second, it took Harry to move them between locations. The appearance of large items like the television mirrors was especially impressive. Sirius winced, hoping that touching any cursed items for such a brief time wouldn't be an issue, since he hadn't realized they were going to actually appear. It took about 2 minutes of furious concentration, but Harry managed to get the vault completely transferred over without obviously breaking anything else. This included quite a large nest egg of presumably archaic galleons, sickles, and nuts, which materialized as a veritable cloud of precious metals around his hand as he swept them from one pane to the other. "Hugh, I need a break," he said, having worn himself out with all the hand waving. It's only for moments, but he had felt the weight of the heavier items. "But I think I got everything. We should just go to the house," Sirius figured. "We can search for the physical location of the vault, and then we can scan the room for cursed items instead of relying on Harry's inspection." "I want to see it," Hermione invited herself. "My parents aren't expecting me back anyway, and they'd be fine with me going to Grimmauld Place." "Ours either," George realized. "Guildhall trip." Fred yelled. "I thought Ron needed to go home for new clothes." Remus raised an eyebrow at the boys. "And I don't feel excellent about absconding with 5 Weasleys without your parents knowing." "Dumbledore will smooth it over if Mum finds out," Fred reasoned. "We don't tell her about loads of stuff," George shrugged. "I'd also like to see the guild hall." Ginny looked winsomely at the defense professor, her newly raised charisma making her plea extra effective. "We can't call ourselves a proper guild without a trip to our guild hall." Lee concurred, and Ron added, "Right, their own maxed-out charisma scores pushing Remus over into agreement." "Fine, but you're all responsible for talking your mother out of killing me if she does find out." Being around Sirius and all the younger marauders had really done a number on Remus' intention to be a responsible adult. "Spring holidays at the guild hall," Ron cheered. As they moved off to hastily assemble their belongings for their impromptu departure, Hermione asked, "Are you two going to be able to side-along apparate this many people?" Remus realized the enormity of what he'd agreed to and just groaned. Chapter 53, Trade. A veritable storm of magical cleaning blew through Grimmauld Place over the first few days of the holidays, with every marauder in residence and in need of a safe place to sleep. Even the twins weren't too bad about the process, due to the novelty of getting to cast magic outside of school. By Friday, the last of the dangerous-looking question marks were cleared from the various rooms on Harry's Guildhall map, though the true niceties of taking care of all the dust and grime might come down to Creature doing his job. On Harry's prompting, Sirius had formally renewed his bond of patronage with the racist elf and was trying to be nicer, but it was hard to be certain how well it was working. They probably wouldn't know for sure until summer, once they returned again, and could tell whether he'd been making progress or allowing it to fall back into disrepair. The old elf at least seemed to have some renewed pride in the house. Once they'd cleared the Darksies from the room with the Black's damaged family tapestry, he insisted on deep cleaning it himself. Perhaps more importantly, they'd finally found the guild vault's physical location. It was 2 floors underground and built fully beneath the neighboring house, behind a hidden door such that you'd never think it was there unless you were looking everywhere, and had Marauder's map powers that could apply to any location. It was a little surprising that the Guildhall map hadn't automatically given it up. Such were the charms on it. The room clearly used liberal amounts of space expansion and was still packed nearly full of neatly stacked objects that almost completely mirrored the grid in Harry's interface. He longed to reach in for the wall of tomes right near the door, but Remus insisted. "This is the point where we get the headmaster involved." Dumbledore merely sighed when he arrived the next day and spotted all the children that should either be at the school or their homes lounging in Grimmauld Place's sitting room. Victorian-era furniture that was meant for uncomfortable and tense high society meetings was nonetheless being put to a game effort by teen bodies with a powerful need to sprawl, and without any adult that would tell them to keep their feet off the velvet. "I don't suppose Marley and Arthur approved of this visit," he asked Remus and Sirius, with a disapproving eyebrow. "Didn't want to steal your thunder in catching the old crowd up, sir," Sirius said with a shit-eating grin. Putting on his catch more flies with honey twinkle, the old man nodded, simply saying, "Well, let's take a look at the vault. Then I suppose everyone here should be part of the secret when I cast the Fidelius anyway." "What's the word about the prison, sir?" Harry asked as he followed the adults down to the vault. Sighing again, Dumbledore explained, I've been most of the week explaining myself to the Wisengamot, and have mostly convinced them that our exploration of the prison happened upon a grave threat to the populace, and nothing could have been done to save the building. There are still several holdouts who, I suppose, would have preferred to be terrorized by a Christies for long enough to understand the gravity of the threat. But they've begun to find the contents of the hidden floors, and some small collection of great historical value survived. Did they find the bodies in the basement? Harry knew that Dawlish had been keen to get them sent to their families for burial. A few. Those levels are the most buried, and there was a secondary collapse, presumably coinciding with your removal of the contents of the guild vault. The ministry really doesn't have that many members skilled enough at transfiguration to quickly shift through all the rubble, though Minerva and I have provided assistance as we are able. They are more concerned with the bodies of the prisoners. Harry winced at that reminder, of which only a few have so far been recovered. Based on the way the building collapsed, it's possible that those high up might have been thrown clear. My old friend Aura Moody keeps insisting no body, no death, and trying to organize squads to patrol the coast for anyone that managed to float away. Sirius shrugged. I don't think anyone in that state could have survived the swim to land, even if they hadn't just fallen a few hundred yards into the freezing water. But I guess I'd also like to see some of those bodies to be sure. Dumbledore might have planned to say something else, but was distracted by Sirius opening the door to the vault and seeing the pile of magical artifacts within. Harry had already spent the last few days inspecting it from within the interface, and it was likely to be a trove of discoveries much grander than the Room of Hidden Things. True to his character, Echrisdes had seemingly made his apprentices store anything of value they wouldn't need every day in the guild vault rather than their rooms. While the missing children of prominent families hadn't walked off with key family relics, there was a lot of really nice stuff still present. In addition to the skill books that Harry had saved, there was a vast array of spell books and family tomes that Echrisdes hadn't left for the apprentices to keep in their personal libraries. Or perhaps he'd managed to sneak out at various points in the 500 years, while the Dementors had been occupied to grab key tomes from the hidden levels. Regardless, quite a few of the volumes Madame Pince had bemoaned not being at Hogwarts were available, and many that weren't even on her index besides. A whole corner of the room was basically a jewelry store, half of it magic and half of it just ornate. Again, Harry wasn't sure how the old lick had convinced his apprentices to turn over such valuable keepsakes, but Remus figured they were kept to a simple dress code as apprentices, and the jewelry they couldn't wear would be safer in the vault than in their rooms waiting for sticky fingers to take. Similarly, personal tools and furnishings, such as small mirrors, musical instruments, chess boards, and the like were part of the vault, most of them magical in some way. The rack of portraits was perhaps the most surprising find. All of them were small canvases, such that they could have been smuggled out of family homes. Still dormant, it was unclear whether they were just beloved relatives that the apprentices had wanted to have at hand to converse with, or whether they might be experts on some subject. Several intense-looking large metal jars seemed to be potion vessels, and inspection suggested that they were heavily preserved and might still be viable. The actual contents of them were multiple individual vials sealed within one jar, so inspection hadn't given Harry any insight into exactly what powerful potions Echrisdes had considered worth expending so much effort preserving. Could he even drink potions himself, as a walking corpse? Finally, the vast majority of the vault was clearly materials and tools. In hindsight, Harry had no idea how much was always in the vault and how much had been in Echrisdes' personal storage. Probably all the seemingly fresh potions' ingredients had been in the timeless void of the Lick's inventory, as well as the various eggs of rare creatures, including, yes, a dragon egg, as he'd implied. He hadn't kept a personal menagerie that had made it into the vault, but a few extremely archaic brooms and flying carpets had made it from his mount's storage, as well as a whole ornate carriage that took up one wall of the room. It was surrounded by piles of rare lumber, metal ingots, and the physical representation of the thousands of coins, and even a few clusters of gems and other negotiable specie, not in the form of wizarding currency. The small pile of objects near the front of the room that represented the original black treasures from the vault were barely noticeable by comparison. Dumbledore simply stared at the immense magical trove for a minute and a half, then jolted himself out of his awe and started to cast detection spells. Colored wisps and ethereal runes appeared at various spaces around the room as he focused on different objects. He had an organized method to it, broad area detection charms giving him clues to which individual objects to focus on. He then periodically frowned and levitated an item to the one empty corner of the room as he decided it was dangerous. It only took half an hour, and Harry's spellbook had filled in nearly all the way on several of the charms before the old man ceased his casting. Those are the ones that are in some way cursed. He gestured at the pile that was daunting, but still dwarfed by all the other uncursed items. Now I'd like to skim the book collection. That took another hour, Dumbledore opening each of the books to ascertain the contents. Most he set back in place. Some he stacked to the side with a forbidding look and references to banned magics. A few he set in another pile, which Harry took to be the ones that he was extremely interested to get to read. Finally, he summed up, "I harbor no regrets about the destruction of Echrisdes. Several of the books he penned as core education for his apprentices look to be deeply troubling. I would not have their words infesting your mind, Harry. The rest, however, seem reasonable reading material. And that stack," Sirius gestured at the ones he'd set aside that weren't dark. "Consider it an old man's due for his recent efforts." His beard twitched in a smile. "None of them are from the Black Library, and they are on topics of great interest to me. Harry can, of course, check them to see if they're skill books before I make off with them, as they say." Harry just shrugged at Sirius' glance. The headmaster really was doing them some pretty big favors, not demanding everything they'd gotten be sent to Hogwarts or the Ministry. That reminded him, what do we do with the cursed stuff and the dark magic books? "I've brought an extended knapsack," he explained. "I suppose I can dispose of the most insidious objects and then replace the rest in the ruins of Azkaban when we dig deep enough. That should go a long way to convincing any doubters of the danger that was averted." "And it's not even really lying," Remus approved. "Those things were inside. Well, a few, I think, might have originally been black treasures that hopefully Sirius will be glad to see gone," the old man agreed. "But it's best to base political moves on the truth for a variety of reasons. Now, let's see about that Fidelius." The Fidelius charm was an involved one. Because Sirius, Harry, and Creature would actually be living at the house. They were the focus, while the rest of the marauders had to wait in the park across the street, lest they be thrown into confusion once they were inside of a home they suddenly couldn't perceive. Calling it a charm was a stretch, Harry thought, since it was basically a whole piece of ritual magic. Circles were drawn on the floor, invocations were recited, and candles were burned. When it was done, the candles flared out, but otherwise Harry couldn't tell the difference other than checking the Guildhall menu to make sure that the feature had been added. He could tell something had happened when they walked outside to see Remus, Fred, George, Lee, Ron, Hermione, and Ginny milling about the park in confusion. "Harry, I can't remember exactly why we were waiting in the park." Hermione nearly wailed, having grown to rely on her maxed intellect and willpower mind being immune to manipulation of any sort. "A common side effect. I apologize," Dumbledore assured her, motioning for everyone to gather close together so he could whisper to them. "The headquarters of the Marauders may be found at number 12, Grimmauld Place, London." "Oh, of course," Hermione agreed, eyes crossing as her memories linked back up. "Only, Headmaster, does this mean that the charm affects information rather than our minds? Because I should be basically immune to mind magic, and that's worrisome for other types of things you might do with that power. I shall direct you to the books on magical information theory when we return to the school," he suggested, to stem the tide of questions. "I suggest, in the meanwhile, that everyone returns to the building, which should now be one of the most secure sites in Britain. I must gather the dark artifacts and head on my own way. And I'm good to check the skill books, sir," Harry confirmed. "I look forward to hearing just how much they taught you on your own return to Hogwarts," the old man agreed. Chapter 54, Taunt. Harry had really never found more than a few skill books at once before. In his normal investigation of the Hogwarts library, he was finding only about one per hour. Upon reading it, the knowledge would have time to situate itself over the time it took him to find the next one. Even on that first day, when he'd found 5 skill books in the little winging library, he'd done so over the course of a couple of hours. It turned out when he tried to mainline a whole library that was entirely skill books, it gave him a giant headache. He got through the first 10 before suddenly his vision started swimming, and he had to lie down and wait for the information to sort itself into his brain. The few seconds it took to consume a skill book wasn't the time required to digest it. You'll go down in history as the only person to make himself physically ill by trying to read too fast, Sirius joked. Well, at least we're not trying to read on a moving vehicle, Hermione corrected. When she got a lot of blank looks from those raised without car trips, beyond the Weasley rides to King's Cross for school, she explained, people get carsick. It's not really the reading, I don't think, just taking your eyes off the moving terrain for too long. Anyway, I think you should limit yourself to maybe one every 10 minutes, and we'll see if you can go faster or slower. The more hours he put into constant skill acquisition, the more he wound up needing to slow down even further. Consequently, it took Harry most of the second week of holidays to get through the 100-plus skill books from a Christie's set. It was still better than having to find them in the school library. Rather than checking book after book after book, he'd just have a stack to hand and periodically quick-read one while hanging out with his friends. About a quarter of them were either ones he'd already read at Hogwarts or otherwise way out-leveled, so he got nothing from them. That left several dozen that gave him XP in skills, mostly of the magical persuasion, though Christie's had focused on Greek, Latin, and French as well. At the end of the week, he'd maxed out all of his OWL skills to 20, as well as conversational Greek and Latin, gotten conversational French to 15, and had a whole new block of newt skills with 1, 2, or 3 ranks in them. Remus and Sirius tested him on his new knowledge, and figured that once he learned all the spells to match, he'd be outcasting everyone in 5th year and set to get reasonable grades in 6th year classes. Hermione was basically over being jealous about it. I do think that Christie's might have seriously overestimated how fast he could get his apprentices up to speed with that collection, she opined. It barely got you into the newt level, and you were almost to 20 in most of your OWL skills. He'd have probably been giving them to apprentices that already had some years of school, though, Ron argued. And it did get Harry basically even in everything. He was behind on the electives compared to the core subjects. ChemPH, she acknowledged, unable to fully rebut the argument. I still think that it would have been more useful if it were more comprehensive and able to get someone all the way through schooling from basically a fresh start. He did have 5 centuries to plan it. If I'd had 5 centuries, I'd have done better. Harry just shrugged. Anyway, between your plan and these books, I'm not even done with 2nd year, and I'm already ahead for 6th. And you've got all 5 electives, Ron pointed out. McGonagall told us we can take 3 at most. They'd been given a brief overview of the electives before the Azkaban trip and had to make their choices by the end of the holidays. I'm planning to take all 5 if they'll let me, Hermione insisted. Though I suppose that I should take the sight on the next level up for divination to be worth my time. If anyone could keep all that straight, it would be you, Hermione, Ron told her. His maxed-out charisma guided him away from asking her if she was mental. But you might be better off. What's the word? Specializing. Plus you probably already can pass owls for muggle studies. Harry could. Not a bad point, she agreed, fluttering a little at the compliment that she could manage all the classes if she wanted. Professor Lupin, do you think they'd let me sit the Muggle Studies owl without taking the subject? With Minerva's recommendation, almost certainly, Remus concurred, having been only half listening. The class is mostly to keep clueless purebloods like that one, he gestured across the room to Sirius, from constantly breaking the statute and having to call in obliviators to cover up their sartorial mistakes. Oi, Sirius objected, tearing himself away from the recovered tome he'd been reading. I didn't even take that class, and I fit in fine. Admittedly, Lily helped a lot, but I've never been as bad as some. My mum taught you to dress muggle, Harry checked, not having realized that. He also didn't clock that his variety of foreign languages helped him figure out what sartorial meant. Wouldn't be seen with your dad and me out in London until she'd gotten us both a whole wardrobe, his godfather agreed. The hard part was just converting galleons to pounds so we could go shopping. The goblins really don't like it when you want to convert the other way. I think I'm going to take divination, since I do have the sight. Might make it more useful, Harry figured. No, on muggle studies. I don't know what to pick from care of magical creatures, arithmancy, and runes. Well, Kettleburn is retiring, Remus revealed, so there will be a new professor for care that would probably enjoy having you all in his class. He wasn't supposed to make it common knowledge that Hagrid would be getting the position. But you've indicated that you haven't really been able to use your arithmancy or runes skills much at all without a basis. Take arithmancy and runes, Hermione agreed. You can self-study creatures, or take 4 classes like I will. She considered the logic, then admitted, I guess I could also self-study creatures. Well, I'm taking care, Ron revealed, so it would be great if I had at least one of you in class to help. Take Muggle studies, Harry shrugged. Then we can help even if we're not in class with you. You taking divination too? Yeah, might get the sight too if we level up again before then. But I hear it's an easy class anyways. Ron edited his choices. So, yeah, okay, Muggle studies and divination. I'll see if I can get Nev to take Muggle studies with me. He really could use it, Hermione agreed. So arithmancy, runes, and divination for me and Harry, and maybe the other 2 for me if Professor McGonagall lets me, and divination and muggle studies for Ron, and he can take both of those with Neville. We should have brought Neville, Ginny insisted, only hearing the last statement as she, Lee, and the twins entered the house from the garden. Gred had to save me from a tentacular. It wasn't as close as all that, Lee disagreed, as the others in the room began to stand, worried that the team on garden cleanup had been in danger. But to save the village, we had to, burn the village. You can grow all new plants in the ashes, Fred said. Less evil plants, George agreed. Thank my mother, Sirius replied, that statement explaining everything. I think that's all the question marks cleared and most of the hazards dealt with, Harry said, confirming it on the guild menu. Then I suppose it's near enough time that we should get back to the school rather than surviving another night on takeaway, Remus decided, marking his place in his book. Owing to the inability to apparate onto Hogwarts grounds and the need to keep Sirius secret, the elder marauders began to drop the kids a pair at a time into the ruined house they'd left from over a week earlier, the Shrieking Shack. We really should turn this into another clubhouse, Fred opined, taking a moment to wander the dusty, werewolf-damaged home that had been Remus' safety spot for transformations as a boy. Though maybe after we've taken a well-deserved break from cleaning and repairing, George countered, calculating the vast amount of effort to make the place tolerable to hang out in. It was a total wreck, even compared to Grimmauld Place or the Gnome Hole under the Weasley Orchard. It's a bit less accessible than the Room of Requirement, Lee figured, not having enjoyed the crouched crawl along more than a Quidditch pitch of dirt tunnel and not looking forward to repeating it on the way out. But we can't always use that, because the headmaster is in there, Ginny argued. And we really should share the room with the rest of the school eventually, Hermione suggested. When the rest of the kids looked at her, scandalized, she argued. What? It would be a valuable training resource for several classes. The room, Remus asked, having worked out what she must be talking about as he and Sirius cracked in with their last load of Harry and Ron. I admit, it would be very valuable for my class, though if I'm only here for 2 more months, I'm loath to lose it to whoever replaces me next year. I never mentioned it, Hermione realized. The jinx, I worked out that it's probably anchored to the diadem. Defense professors started having problems only after Tom Riddle wasn't hired. Unless he came up with the plan much earlier, it had to be something he created about the same time he was hiding the Horcrux. It could very well simply be perverting one of the diadem's powers intended to protect the school. Once we destroy it, the problem could be over. I wonder if there's a way to test that, until a teacher lasts the whole year, though, Ron countered. I'll consider whether I want to risk it, Remus shrugged, clearly not totally convinced, though I may suggest to Albus that he get on with disposing of it. He lifted the trapdoor into the tunnel and motioned for the crew to go on ahead. Sirius had already shifted into Padfoot. Why hasn't he? Harry asked, dropping down into the dirt tunnel. He's been testing it to try to work out how to find the others that were likely made. Remus shared. Though as busy as he's been, I'm not sure he's made much progress. There wasn't too much else to discuss on the long, crouched walk between the off-campus building and the Whooping Willow. Harry used his map to confirm nobody was nearby, then reached out to tap the special knot on the tree that temporarily paralyzed it before exiting onto the Hogwarts grounds. It was weirdly bittersweet. With each time he returned to campus from the Marauders Guild Hall, it felt less like returning home than just going back to school. The acquisition of a real home had taken away some of the previous allure of the place he would spend most of his time for the next 5 years. But it was still a lovely mid-April Saturday to spend outside, or at least it would have been if the school had completely cleared out for the holidays. However, the younger Marauders had barely had a chance to drop off their stuff in their rooms, then go to sit down by the lake, Remus and Sirius having headed back to Remus' office, when a whole cluster of purple dots began to bear down on them on Harry's map. Not quite the red of enemies, they certainly weren't the blue of normal students just out to enjoy the lake themselves. Incoming, like 10 people. I think they might be a problem, Harry warned. Sure enough, it wasn't long before they could see green-accented robes coming into view over the rolling hills of the grounds near the lake. The Marauders were already standing, having spread out to avoid bunching up as targets and placing Ginny to use the tree they'd been lounging near as cover. A particularly recognizable platinum blonde head of hair was toward the front. Potter. Draco yelled as soon as he spotted the group and thought he'd be overheard. You killed members of our families, and we demand justice. The Malfoy heir couldn't help but end his yell with a smirk, but some of his housemates looked genuinely angry, and they included upper-year students like Ursula Avery, Fortinbras Tuft, Aidan Oakham, and Kelly Burke, whose last names Harry vaguely recalled matching names he'd seen in the prison, as well as the usual suspects on the Slytherin Quidditch team. The one that hurt, though, wasn't a member of Slytherin at all. Morag MacDougall, a Ravenclaw in his year that Harry had regular classes with for his entire time at Hogwarts, didn't look angry so much as she looked distraught. My dad was supposed to get out this summer, she accused. He was only in for 2 years, and you brought the prison down on top of him. Harry barely followed the rest of the conversation, his friends standing up for him in increasingly loud voices. It had been one thing when it was just a bunch of faceless criminals that had been hurt, but somewhere in the back of his head, he'd known that Morag's father was in jail for what she'd long claimed was trumped-up charges over a misunderstanding. He was racking his brain over whether there was anything else he could have done. Played along with Christie's plan for longer. Figured out how to keep the Horcrux-powered machine from exploding catastrophically. Thought ahead to warn the Auras that something bad enough to put the prisoners at risk could happen. In a logical world, Harry was the least to blame. A megalomaniacal dark wizard had built a structurally unsound cursed tower, and centuries of adult wizards had used it as a penitentiary with no evacuation plan. He'd managed to take the one action that surprised a lick with the Elder Wand enough to end his ancient plan to nuke Europe. He'd been surrounded by several grown men, including the greatest wizard of his generation, that had been equally flat-footed by the collapse of the tower with people inside. But Harry had his saving people thing, and suddenly he realized that there were people he didn't. He must have absently sent a message to Remus, because several professors showed up in time to prevent the 7-on-10 argument from becoming a spell battle on the grounds. Barely. There would be speeches from the headmaster at multiple meals, increased attention to prevent encounters in the hallways for the next few weeks, and lots of casual dismissals from his friends that he had anything to be guilty of. But a 12-year-old's emotions are not logical, and Harry didn't mention that a new goal showed up on his quest log. The Goblet of Fire main quest, who will be the greatest mage in Europe. Attend the Quidditch World Cup. Escape the riot. Optional. Don't let anyone else die.